Morning, church. It's another day and another morning for us to begin spending time with Jesus. So I hope that through these devotions, or maybe your own, that you can fan into flame your spiritual walk with Him. And I hope that after today, you are energized and ready for another day. With that, let's begin. How many of you guys like self-help? You know, those self-help books or articles, right? You can look them up online or go to a bookstore and you see there's book after book, article after article talking about how to help yourself. Because why not, right? Why not become a better person? Why not fix yourself, right? Why not fix problems that we have and be happy, okay? There was a time where I went through a phase where self-help books were by far my favorite. I remember going to bookstores and, of course, not to buy any books, but to just sit there and read different self-help books. You know, books like How to Get Rich, How to Be Happy, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? How to Be Effective. And the list goes on and on and on. Self-help books are quite fun to read, I admit. It sounds great and productive, but since then, I've definitely moved past self-help after realizing that the only person that can help me, it's God. But anyway, that's a different topic. Now, when we read self-help books, one of the things that you'll notice is that there's an assumption that life will be smooth, life will be great, life can be absolutely wonderful and amazing as long as we figure it out, right? And books and articles will say different things, but basically that's the assumption, that everything will be fantastic once you figure out your problems. As long as you master your schedule, you'll achieve happiness. As long as you work on your speaking skills or use these techniques, you will become one of the greatest public speakers ever, right? As long as you fix your anger issues or your pride issues, then you'll be a more loving person, right? It sounds great. I mean, if I give you a few steps in order to find happiness or to become the happiest person on this earth, I'm sure many of you guys would take that, and a lot of people would buy that. But there was one time when I went to a bookstore. As I pulled out one of these self-help books, there was a book that I ran into called The Road Less Traveled, and it was by Dr. M. Scott Peak. Now, I thought this book looked super good. The cover wasn't so great, but the title sounded amazing. Wow, The Road Less Traveled? And I was ready. I was like, this is going to be the best self-help advice ever. But I remember as I opened the book and I looked at the very first chapter, the first 3 words that I saw, can you guess what it said? It almost made me shut the book. It said, life is difficult. Man, I didn't open a book to make me feel sad, right? I wanted a book that would help me. But Dr. Peak, he takes a very different approach. Instead of assuming life will be fantastic, his approach begins with the ideal that life is really about a long journey of solving problems and overcoming challenges. Life is difficult. Now, Paul continues his letter to Timothy in chapter 2, basically giving him the same advice. Paul understands that a life for Jesus is not necessarily an easy one, and very rightfully so, as Paul is writing this in prison. He knows exactly how challenging and really how difficult a life is because of the gospel message. And what we find here is Paul challenges Timothy to take part in this journey. Just like Dr. Peak gives advice in his book and starts off by saying life is difficult, Paul says the very same. Timothy's context is that ministry is difficult, but in our context, it's the Christian life that's difficult. 2 Timothy 2, verse 3-6 says, "Join with me in suffering like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civil affairs, but rather tries to please his commanding officer. Similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. And the hard-working farmer should be the first to receive a share of the crops." You see, Paul gives this charge to Timothy, that the reality of ministry, the reality of following Jesus, the reality of living in alignment to the gospel message will be challenging, right? And keep this in mind. This isn't something that's optional. It's not something that we can choose to put in our Christian walk. It's something that's just there. But this reality of living as a Christian means that we will face suffering. In other translations, which I actually like better, it says that we ought to endure hardship. So from here, Paul gives us 3 different metaphors that really explains the 3 qualities we need to endure through these hardships. He first talks about a soldier. You see, the soldier portrays a sense of priority. As a soldier has to leave behind everything to go and fight for his or her country, they fight even to the point of great suffering and hardship. In the same way, disciples have to leave everything behind in order to serve and please our commanding officer, who is God, and that includes going through great suffering and hardship. Then he talks about an athlete. You see, an athlete models discipline. As an athlete trains, prepares, and works out to compete, athletes have to train within the boundaries of certain rules or guidelines. They don't just make up their own rules and do their own thing when they compete. They have to really, in their training, keep all their feelings, their instincts, their reactions all under control in order to compete according to whatever rules are provided. In the same way, disciples must live a life under the guidance and boundaries of the gospel message. And then Paul talks about a hardworking farmer. You see, the farmer is the pattern of perseverance. So, as a farmer works very hard and very long, and sometimes in conditions that are less than ideal, and sometimes without any crop, a farmer works diligently and has to be very patient. In the same way, disciples also must persevere, and sometimes for a really long time with little to sometimes no reward, but we must do it all for the sake of being faithful to Jesus. Some of us might be thinking, well, Paul's talking to Timothy, and Timothy's in ministry. I'm not in ministry, so I'll just opt out of this. But you see, we all have been called to ministry. Jesus calls us to go and make disciples of all nations. And whatever you decide to be in life, you can achieve that. You can go and make disciples of all nations. But we have to always remember that this life with Jesus will be difficult. It always will be. So remember this, just like a soldier, athlete, or farmer, living a life as a disciple will be difficult, but the great joys and rewards of living a life for Him are far greater.